He considers himself a strong man in the fight against crime and drugs. These are not just words though, as in his time as mayor of Davao City, he transformed it into one of the most peaceful places in the Philippines. However, the method in which he has achieved it was not so peaceful. And now being emulated nationally as president, many people are saying he's gone way too far. In his latest show of defiance to his critics this week, the Philippine president launched an expletive-laden attack on the European Union. This after they condemned his brutal crackdown on crime. President Rodrigo Duterte said the EU was acting out of guilt. Hypocritical former colonial powers like France and Britain, he said, were trying to atone for their own sins. He was referring to the European colonial era killings, which were nothing compared to his death count, and his victims were only criminals.
Pagko ako dito, sino pinatay ko? Assuming it to be true. 1007, who are they? Criminals? You call that genocide? Ilan ang pinatay nila?
The 71-year-old who's previously called the US President Barack Obama a son of a whore and UN Chief Ban Ki-moon a fool also swore repeatedly and raised his middle finger. In another speech on Thursday, he called the UN chief a devil and invited the UN and the EU to investigate his deaths.
Kaya today I announce sa international, sa Al Jazeera, I am inviting the United Nations, si Ban Ki, anong pangalan niyang yawa niya? Ban Ki-moon, Ban Ki-san. I am inviting the EU, yung pinakamahusay, send the best lawyer of your town.
Duerte took office on the 30th of June of this year on a wave of optimism in electing a strong leader who was authentic. What you see is what you got was the mantra, and what got him elected.
We will not stop until the last drug lord, the last financier, and the last pusher have surrendered or put behind bars. Or below the ground, if they so wish.
Since then, in nearly 3 months, about 3,000 people have been killed in his clampdown on crime and drugs. They have been killed either by police or vigilantes after the new president effectively sanctioned the murder of criminals, drug dealers, and even drug users themselves. On his campaign trail, he said 100,000 people would be killed, so there's more yet to come. Which is a vow severely criticized by the UN and human rights charities. They say the killings, for which few details are known and no efforts are made at accountability, have been a profound setback for human rights and the rule of law in the Philippines. A Senate hearing also began last month on the alleged extrajudicial killings of drug suspects under the present administration. So what brought Duterte to power that now threatens his country's relationships with external bodies and potentially incite chaos at home? To millions of Filipinos, Duterte's appeal is simple. He is, they believe, the sort of bombastic firebrand who can clean up a crime-riddled nation and eradicate endemic corruption. For more than 22 years, Duerte has served as a maverick mayor of Davao City, which is a sprawling coastal metropolis where his unmerciful stance on crime earned him the nicknames The Punisher and Duterte Harry. Before he took office, Davao City was known for its war zone-like lawlessness, but last year, a crowdsourced poll declared it the 4th safest city in the world, which is a remarkable statistic. Tourism is vital to the Philippines economy, but more and more foreign governments are warning their citizens to avoid travelling there, noting the significant threat of violent crime and the very high threat of kidnapping in the country's southern regions. The country, in other words, needed a quick and brutal fix, and that was Duterte's mandate. However, since coming to power, many have been questioning on how this is abusing the rule of law, the lack of accountability, and affecting relationships beyond the hand of the dealer and the user. For Philippines, who will have Duterte for the next 6 years as president, how he will steer the course of the country's defense and security, national governance and foreign relations is a worrying prospect. Afzal Ahmed, Asia Wired. Joining me to look at his campaign so far is Phelim Kine, who's a Deputy Director in Human Rights Watch's Asia Division. Do tweet us your thoughts on this discussion at Asia Wired using the hashtag Duterte on drugs. Thank you, Phelim, for joining us. Firstly, President Duterte has said that he needs to extend his crime war for another 6 months. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's important for us to distinguish that what President Duterte calls a war on drugs is more accurately a war on the poor, because what he has done is he has unleashed the Philippines National Police to basically pursue a campaign of killings of suspected drug users and drug dealers without any recourse to rule of law. So we have more than 1,000 people who have been killed by police in the last 3 months in anti-drug operations. That compares to 68 people who were killed in anti-drug operations in the first 6 months of this year. It's a more than a 15-fold increase in police killings of criminal suspects. And I think it's important to remember that these people never saw a courtroom, they never saw a lawyer. All we know is that the police said that they, quote unquote, fought back and then they were killed. This is an urgent situation that requires an urgent and impartial investigation. But President Duterte is steamrolling rule of law, intimidating critics, and insisting that this war on drugs is going to continue for another 6 months. It's absolutely barbaric.
But some say Duterte had a democratic mandate for what he's doing at the moment. Should he care if the Philippines people are behind him on this?
It's important to remember that President Duterte won the election with a plurality of the vote. So 38% of Philippine voters voted for him. 62% of Philippine voters voted for someone else. So he did not have a huge mandate to pursue this vicious and unlawful course of extrajudicial violence as a form of crime control. And he obviously has very enthusiastic, if not rabid, supporters amongst that 38%. But the fact is that supporting an unlawful, brutal, and murderous course of action is no excuse for just trashing rule of law.
And of course, with the support that he did have, do you think this was as a result of what's been happening in Philippine society in previous years in terms of the state of the judiciary, in terms of seeking the rule of law, etc.? Is this as a result?
You know, President Duterte has tapped into a deep well of frustration and anger amongst a wide swath of Philippine society. People who feel that the promised dividends of the post-authoritarian, post-dictatorship period, the People's Revolution, would result in a trickle-down of greater economic and social equality, and at the very least, improved security. And so he is tapping into concerns that previous governments have been unable to deal with, these very complex problems of inequality, of crime, of drug use. And President Duterte offers very, very simple, direct, and brutal solutions to those very complex problems. He sees a problem with drugs, and he calls for those people to be killed, despite the fact that it completely overrules protections in the Philippines Constitution and under international law.
In terms of looking at the Senate hearing currently going on, into Duterte's drug war, do you think it will achieve anything?
Well, the Senate hearing was convened by Senator Leila de Lima, who is the former Secretary of Justice under former President Aquino. And she has been removed by pro-Duterte senators from the head of the Justice Committee. So the future and the viability of this sole official investigation into this surging death toll caused by Duterte's war on drugs is very much in doubt. Senator Leila de Lima is essentially being vilified, intimidated, and by pro-Duterte politicians who are seeking her political destruction. And that means that there will be one less very important and courageous voice to really try to press the case that these killings are unacceptable and they demand an impartial investigation, and that the government needs to walk back on this violent, aggressive rhetoric, exhorting the public to kill suspected criminals.
So on that point, so what would you propose? How would you propose Duterte approach this problem of security, which of course the people are, seeking desperately for?
Well, the first thing he needs to recognize is that he, through his war on drugs campaign, has increased public insecurity. Why do I say that? Since July 1st until September 4th, Philippine National Police statistics indicate that more than 1,000 people have been killed by unidentified gunmen. And these unidentified gunmen are targeting what they call suspected drug users and drug dealers in apparent response to President Duterte's enthusiastic exhortations that the public take the law into their own hands and kill criminal suspects. So President Duterte has let the genie out of the bottle in terms of giving carte blanche to unlawful extrajudicial violence, which means that anybody in the Philippines now with a gun and a grudge can with confidence kill someone, knowing full well that the police are not going to investigate. There will be no redress, no accountability. People now in the Philippines can literally get away with murder. And that is the direct result of Duterte's war on drugs.
And how would they get out of this, increasingly vicious cycle?
The first thing is that President Duterte has to walk back his war on drugs. He needs to recognize and publicly reassert the primacy of rule of law. He needs to reassert his commitment to freedoms and protections embodied in the Philippine Constitution. And he needs to make absolutely clear that extrajudicial violence is not a solution to complex problems of drugs and crime. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we need urgently to have an impartial investigation into this surge of bloodletting that altogether has killed more than 2,000 people in just over 3 months in the Philippines. So that he needs to tone down and reverse his rhetoric, and we need to have an investigation, hopefully by some UN agency, so there would be some measure of reliability and impartiality.
Well, of course, he's not listening to the UN or any other body in that case. What sort of responsibility has the international community have in this situation?
You're absolutely correct, is that President Duterte has been completely dismissive of protests from the international community, including the United Nations, about this very abusive and murderous war on drugs. So the other tool in the toolbox for countries that have close bilateral relationships with the Philippines and care about rule of law in the Philippines is that they should withhold funding and aid to the Philippine security forces. They should announce an immediate suspension of financial support for the police until and unless the Philippine government recognizes and changes this policy that has killed more than 2,000 people in the past 3 months. The United States commits tens of millions of dollars to training of the Philippine police. The U.S. government should turn off the taps on that funding immediately and make it clear that that money isn't coming back until the Philippines makes adjustments in its policies and again recognizes the rule of law and the need to protect the fundamental freedoms of the Filipino people.
Of course, lastly, Of course, President Duterte still has 6 years in his term. How do you see the state of the Philippines by then?
Well, right now we're heading for, if the situation remains unchanged, by the end of December, more than 6,000 Filipinos will have died in this quote-unquote war on drugs. So this abusive, wrong-headed, misguided policy is going to claim thousands of more lives unless the president recognizes that it is a fundamental error and that this policy needs to change immediately and the killings need to stop. If he doesn't do that, then rule of law and safety of the Philippine people are very, very much at risk, in doubt, in peril in the coming years.